Hello there, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be looking at the rise of the Maquis. Okay, so the Maquis, a very controversial organization within the Federation. Some see them as heroes, some as freedom fighters, others view them as nothing more than terrorists, thugs, and murderers and mercenaries and disruptors of the peace. Today we're going to look at both sides of that argument, exactly how the Maquis came to be and why. So let's start with a little bit of history. The Maquis rose from a series of Federation colonies, mostly human, if not all human, that existed near the Cardassian border. These colonies, some of them had been there for hundreds of years, founded as far back as the early 22nd century, or maybe even a little bit earlier. These colonies, one of which notably was actually a colony of mostly Native Americans who remembered basically being displaced in their land back on Earth in the first place, and they came here for a completely fresh start. Yes, they're Federation members. Yes, they're citizens of the Federation. Yes, they enjoyed the benefits of that: replicators, starships, protection from Starfleet, etc., etc. But in recent years, they'd had to suffer through the Cardassian border wars. These were colonies that still had struggles and problems, but they had a life, and there were millions of people living across them. Because of the Cardassian border wars, though, the Federation wanted peace with the Cardassians. Now this, we should remember, is coming off the golden age of exploration. Now the Cardassians are technologically inferior to humans. Massively. The Federation Starfleet has a huge advantage over the Cardassians technologically. That's not to say the Cardassians are not a threat, or their vessels aren't powerful, but they aren't a threat on their own. Even weaker Federation starships could deal with Cardassian warships. This didn't provoke the response from the Federation that, say, the Borg did when they would build Defiant-class warships, things like that. Starfleet was quite content to keep using Ambassador and Excelsior and old Constitution-class ships and New Orleans-class and vessels like that were antiquated in some cases, or simply not built for war. These were not ships that were combat-orientated. Yeah, they had combat attributes, but they were not warships. Starfleet perceived the Cardassians as such a negligible threat. They never had a defeat like Wolf 359. There was a Sek'lek 3 massacre, things like that. But these weren't massive tactical victories by the Cardassians. They were simply butchery. The Federation did not perceive the Cardassians to be enough of a threat to warrant a major response. They were able to deal with them with a standard response. However, that didn't mean that peace was not preferable, and they sued for peace. And eventually, both sides made concessions to create the demilitarized zone. The Cardassian colonies were sacrificed on one side and Federation colonies on the other, handing over territory mutually for a compromise, where both sides don't win, but neither side loses. Now, the Federation had a single representative from its colonies as a voice for the colonies to come during the negotiations, but apparently they were completely ignored and their objections simply overruled. The Federation decided it was going to hand that territory over. Ships like the Enterprise and others were sent into the region to evacuate the colonies. The colonies refused. Some of them, of course, would have evacuated. There would have been some people who would have left. There would have been some colonies that evacuated. But the majority stayed. They opted to stay. Eventually, a deal was brokered with the Cardassians for citizens to stay on both sides. The Cardassian colonies were fine to stay where they were. The Cardassians to the Federation to look after them. It also gave the Cardassians a foothold within Federation borders. I'm sure the Obsidian Order loved that. And the Maquis, the Maquis colonies, stayed on the Cardassian side, but would instantly start to suffer from attacks from the Cardassian authorities. Institutionalized murders, essays, and various other things against the colonies took place, either orchestrated by or turning a blind eye from the Cardassian authorities, which were meant to be there for their protection. It got to the point where the colonists knew they shouldn't go out at night because they risked attack or even being killed. And attacks were pretty much documented daily across the colonies, and being on the wrong side of the border meant the Federation couldn't come to their help. So without Starfleet and the Federation to back them up, it became a redundant problem. They'd report these attacks, the Federation would lodge a complaint, but nothing changed because Starfleet wasn't willing to enforce it. Now, I'm not going to blame Starfleet for this, because we do openly see within Starfleet there were many conscientious objectors who openly believed that the treaty was a mistake. Cal Hudson, who we'll come back to in a moment, was one of the more prominent figures who believed this. It was a bad treaty. Starfleet in general, with the exception of maybe some of the admirals like Nechayev who helped negotiate it, simply didn't care about the fate of a few colonists. They thought they should have just left. They were stupid enough to stay. They asked for it, is basically how they saw it. But many people at like Picard and Sisko's level saw it a little differently. The Cardassians couldn't be trusted. The Bajorans didn't understand how the Federation could simply abandon its colonies to a race of monsters, in their opinion, like the Cardassians. And there was a lot of sympathy within the Federation amongst the public for the Federation colonies that had stayed on the other side. Starfleet in general thought it was a bad treaty, but despite their objections, Starfleet is ultimately a military organization. I know that in and of itself is a controversial take, but even though its main goal is science and exploration, it has military attributes, particularly in its command structure. You do as you're told. The civilian Federation government made a decision. Starfleet does as it's told. They got no say in it. And remember, again, we're coming off the golden age of exploration here, where Starfleet simply didn't see big threats. And its naivete was on display for all to see and be taken advantage of by the Cardassians. It's why the Federation signed such a bad treaty in the first place. And it was a bad treaty. Yes, they thought that the colonists would simply evacuate, but the fact that they trusted the Cardassians to uphold their side of the treaty was naive at best, criminal at worst. And the colonists were the ones caught in the middle. Eventually, though, there were people on both sides who wanted the peace to remain, Gul Dukat being one of them. No one on the Cardassian side really wanted war once again, but they did want rid of those Federation colonists. So, illicitly, the Cardassian government began supplying arms to its colonists. Sympathizers within the Federation began supplying arms to their colonists. Or they reached out and found their own way to get their hands on them. They would modify shuttles and other civilian craft, such as the old courier vessels that they had on the colonies. They would convert these into fighting ships, which would become known as the Maquis Raiders. The Condor class, which is its official name, becoming the preeminent vessel used widely by the Maquis. But they would also get their hands on Peregrine class assault vessels. These fighters were actually Federation fighter ships used by Starfleet, which probably were on the colonies for some kind of colonial defense, or they'd managed to get their hands on them through sympathizers from within Starfleet. But either way, those were actual combat vessels. So they were a tier above the old Condors. The Condor class were older ships, civilian vessels, not Starfleet ships. And they were simply outfitted with additional weapons loads and torpedo launchers, which was something they didn't come with. Obviously, civilian ships didn't carry photon torpedoes within the Federation, so the Condor class, the Maquis Raider, having photons was a modification to the design, not something that came as standard. It might have had phasers, but that would have been about it. So the Maquis was born, from their point of view, out of necessity. The Federation didn't come to their aid. The Cardassian government was smuggling weapons in and was attacking their people. It showed a side of humanity that I think is often underrepresented within Star Trek. Again, the golden age of technology, a golden age of exploration. Starfleet has its best and brightest on its shining beacons of hope like the Enterprise D, going out, going forth and showing the best sunny side of the Federation. But not everyone in the Federation. For example, a psychopath is a psychopath. It's a mental state. You don't get rid of people like that just because you've made paradise. And as Sisko put it, Earth was the problem, because people at Starfleet Command looked out a window and they saw paradise. But the frontier worlds, near the Cardassian border and in other places, didn't live in paradise. And those humans still were human. And that, as I said, the underrepresented side of humanity was seen more heavily in these colonists, I feel, than what you saw generally within the borders of the Federation or aboard ships like the Enterprise. Pushed to their limit, as Quark would once put it, you take away their comfy beds, their replicators, and these nice, peaceful humans become as savage as any Klingon. So as a result, this saw the rise of the Maquis. They would start attacking Cardassian ships like the Boknor. They would start engaging even Cardassian warships eventually. They would redistribute their resources and forces into the Badlands, a region of space that the Cardassians found it difficult to navigate, but their small, nimble ships could easily make it through. Again, Federation tech was far more advanced than Cardassian. The small pursuit vessels and attack ships could maneuver in the Badlands easily, while anything the Cardassians had that was actually a threat to those ships was too big too bulky and too unmaneuverable, and just didn't have the reaction time and sensor efficiency to navigate something like the Badlands. Whereas the human vessels, the Starfleet ships, they did. So that's the reason why the Maquis came up. Now let's have a look at this from the other side a little bit. The Maquis, as a terrorist organization, as they were designated by the Cardassians and by the Federation. Although there was a lot of sympathy on the Federation side for their colonists, the Cardassians would effectively deal with their warring colonists in their little war they would start out there, as Ducat would put it. But the Federation would have to try and step in to deal with its wayward colonists. And despite the sympathy for them, despite Starfleet in some ways being empathetic towards them, particularly Cal Hudson, who we'll get to now, the Maquis was still a rogue organization which had betrayed the law. They had violated the treaty, or at least from the Federation's point of view. The Federation wanted peace above all else with the Cardassians. They did not want to continue fighting with them. It was a pointless conflict to continue as far as they were concerned. If the price of peace was this handing over of a few insignificant worlds, but we get a few in return, you can basically just swap the colonists around. Yes, these people have made a life for themselves. Yeah, there's millions of them. It'll take a little bit of time to move them all. But buildings can be replaced as long as the people are okay. Starfleet, the Federation more specifically, signed a deal that says, yeah, you can have those worlds. We'll just take the population. They can go resettle on another world. No harm, no foul. Both sides get something that they want. Both sides lose something they already had. That is the essence of negotiation, the essence of compromise. But when the colonists refused to leave, the Federation was going to force them, but because that was a little bit of history repeating itself with some of them, they decided against forcing them, simply allowing them to have the right to stay there. This was because Federation law guarantees freedom. When the colonists decided they didn't want to move, they couldn't be made to, because that's against the Federation's freedom of movement and rights of its individuals. Starfleet and the Federation had to respect the rights of the colonists to stay, even though it was ill-advised, and Starfleet multiple times tried to convince them to leave. Even when the hostilities started up, Starfleet, if those colonists had at any time said, we want to leave, the Federation would have sent transports in, picked them all up, and they'd have been out of there and they'd have been safe. Starfleet would assign Commander Cal Hudson to watch over the region and work as a Federation attaché and basically someone the colonists could go to if they were having a problem. But he quickly learned that Starfleet was, and the Federation more specifically, was more interested in maintaining the peace and maintaining that treaty than they were about protecting their own citizens. To the point where when the citizens started to fight back, he believed that the Federation saw its own people as their enemy, not the Cardassians. But this was because if they'd have gone in to defend the colonists, if Starfleet had violated the treaty and gone in, it would have started a war. If the Federation would have decided the Cardassians are violating the treaty and gone in, it would have started a war. And those few people who were dying would have been the tip of the iceberg. Those colonies would have been indefensible because the Federation Starfleet had already pulled back. So the Cardassians would have been easily in a position to exterminate those colonies before Starfleet could have adequately responded. Again, remember, golden age of exploration. They didn't have Defiant class, Prometheus class, Akira class ships yet. He was still looking at a small number of Galaxy class and then a load of ships like Excelsior and other such vessels. Yes, powerful ships, but not warships. And they're spread out everywhere. So basically, Starfleet saw it as a necessary sacrifice. The colonists had a choice. They didn't have to stay there. They made a conscious decision to remain in hostile territory, dealing with a hostile enemy. So that, again, resulted in the rise of the Maquis. But there is a good argument for both sides. Yes, Starfleet abandoned the colonies. They signed a bad treaty, well, Federation. They signed a bad treaty, they abandoned the colonies, and they forced the colonists to take matters into their own hands and organize themselves into a militia and eventually an organized fighting force in the form of the Maquis. They would get support from within the Federation, with multiple Starfleet officers defecting to join them. Cal Hudson being one of them, Michael Eddington being another one, these two men being very notable, as well as, of course, many people like Chakotay and others who would leave Starfleet to also go home to fight for their colonies. So it's people defending their land, defending their homes, defending their people, because they felt betrayed and abandoned by their actual people. And although the Maquis would take pains not to engage in federation with the Federation, and ultimately was planning to declare independence from it, because again they were abandoned, that would lead to nothing because of the Dominion. That's another issue. The Federation's point of view was these people were disturbing the peace, they were criminals, but it was trying to find the criminals in amongst those that weren't. Remember, the Maquis were a group, an organization. Not every colonist living in the DMZ was a Maquis. But every Maquis was effectively a colonist, or at least they were at first, until they did start getting members coming in from outside who were very empathetic. The sympathy across the Federation and from within Starfleet complicated matters extensively when dealing with the Maquis. But, all things considered, what side do you fall on? The Maquis had a right to defend themselves, yes, but did they have a right to blow up every Cardassian ship they had a chance to do so? Yes, if a Cardassian ship was maybe transporting weapons, blow it up, it makes it a strategic target. At least they were military personnel. But that's dozens of people killed every time. People that had nothing to do with your conflict. People who would never go home to see their families. The tactics often utilized by the Maquis were just as savage and dangerous and brutal as those employed by the Cardassians, making them no better. So is that action justified just because the Cardassians behave that way? Is it justified for you to retaliate in kind with the same kind of barbarism? That's the question I'm posting. I'm not going to give my thoughts on that. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of the Maquis. Were they right? Were they wrong? Did they go too far? How was their conduct itself the problem? Or simply was that the only way to deal with an enemy like the Cardassians?